and it's our Sunday night community chat live. So let me know any questions you have. We're going to talk about Spanish tennis, the Spanish method. I wrote the book, The Secrets of Spanish Tennis. So I love talking about Spanish methodology and Spanish players, Spanish training, and anything that relates to Spanish tennis. That's sort of the big topic of the show. Congratulations to Carlos Alcaraz with the big win at the Australian, winning the career Grand Slam and his 7th Grand Slam overall. So this is very exciting if you're a fan of Spanish tennis, which of course I am. I've studied in Spain for 20 years, and I have the classic book on the Spanish tennis method that is very popular in the tennis world. So I'm happy to answer any questions about Spanish tennis. I'm happy to talk about Spanish tennis technique and how they train in Spain. If you're curious, you can ask me anything you'd like. If you have other questions about technique or anything on your mind from Tennis Evolution, this is our Sunday night conversation where the community can get together and ask me any of their technical questions, any help they need with their strokes, things like that. And we're happy to help. This also serves as a podcast episode, so this will be recorded and made into a podcast for my podcast is called the Prodigy Maker Tennis Show, and it's on all your podcasting platforms. So if you prefer to listen to the show, that's also available. I just got off the court, and we had a long day of training, and so this is a very good time to talk tennis because I've been coaching all day, and my mind is fired up and ready to answer any of your questions. But in the meantime, while everyone gets logged in, let's talk about Spanish tennis, Spanish training, and Alcaraz. I wrote on my Substack. If you look up Chris Lewitt, Lewit, if you're interested, if you like Substack, I have a very good Substack where I send out a very high quality essay that I work on all week. And I send it out on Sundays, and you can get that essay for free. And last week or 2 weeks ago, I wrote about the changing of the guard and how the training in Spain is changing. Spain is, instead of being a destination, instead of being a place where only homegrown players were built, which is the way it used to be. Spain used to have as many as 15 players in the top 100. And now Spain is becoming very well known as a destination for foreign players and for visitors to train. So they're training non-native players in Spain now. And this is a relatively new phenomenon in Spain in the last decade or so. So Spain's become very much a training hub for players who are not actually Spanish. So a lot of people ask me if Spanish tennis is on the decline since Rafa Nadal retired. And my answer is sort of yes and no. No, because the training method is still doing awesome. Like they have a wonderful way of training players there, and the philosophy and methodology is really strong. But at the same time, their numbers have gone down for the men. They only have, at my last count, seven native Spanish players in the top 100, including Alcaraz. And the U.S. it has a remarkable number. The U.S. is actually in the lead. So for all of you who have doubts about American tennis, we can talk about that too. But American tennis is doing incredibly well right now. So I just wanted to congratulate American men's and women's tennis. They have, at my last count, when I wrote the article a couple weeks ago, the American men had 15 men in the top 100. So they're the strongest country. And the American women had 16 women in the top 100. So look at America just like knocking it out of the park. Leader in the clubhouse here with 15 and 16 professional players for men and women respectively. That is a dominant force on the pro tour. And it's great to have American tennis back. We still need a Grand Slam winner on the men's side. We have Grand Slam winners on the women's side. But we still don't have a men's Grand Slam winner since 2003, I believe, Andy Roddick. So that's going on 23 years without a men's Grand Slam winner. That is a significant drought. That's longer than the drought they had in Spain in the 70s and 80s. They didn't have a champion there for about 17 years. So we're I think France also has a very, very long drought. They could have a longer drought than ours. But we have so many high quality players who are American coming up. It's really, really impressive. If you're curious, Italy has, at my last count, eight players in the top 100, and Spain has 7. So those are pretty close. And I talked about this in the article that Italy has taken a lot of the training methods from Spain and a lot of the philosophy from Spain and sort of adopted that in Italy. Piatti is a very famous coach in Italy, and he studied in Spain. He studied with the Spanish system and took the best parts and brought it over to Italy. And so I think the Spanish system has had a very big influence on Italy, and that's one of the reasons why, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why Italian tennis is also doing very well and has made a big comeback over the last decade. So Spain is this remarkable training hub now, especially in Barcelona and on the east coast of Spain, where many, many foreign players go to hone their game as a finishing school. And many, many Spanish coaches are traveling the world. There's a diaspora, outspreading of Spanish coaches in Asia, in all different parts of the world, who are bringing the Spanish method to other parts of the world and helping players there locally. And also a tremendous amount of Spanish coaches traveling with players on the international circuits, on the junior circuits, and on the pro circuits. So there's this profound Spanish influence. Even as you see Spain, the numbers go down a little bit, there's a very powerful Spanish influence at the professional level of tennis, at the international level of tennis. And I think that's just indicative of a system and a method that is very high quality and has a unique power to train players and develop top players. I really believe in the Spanish method. It's one of the methods that we use here in my academy. And this is something I spent 20 years of my life studying the Spanish method. So obviously I believe in it very much. So many players are going to Spain now, and Spain has developed a lot of players that you don't necessarily see in the rankings. You wouldn't identify them as Spanish. So for example, De Minaur is probably the best example, top 10 player from Australia, and he actually grew up and lived and trained in Spain most of his life. Another good example is Rublev. Rublev is another top men's player who, along with Karen Khachanov, they both trained in Barcelona at Slam for many years and developed their games there. Going back even more into the history, if you're familiar with tennis history, players like Marat Safin, players like Igor Andreev, players like Dinara Safina, Safin's sister, and many players from Russia and Eastern Europe and Asia have and are traveling to Spain or living in Spain and recruiting Spanish coaches, getting the expertise of Spanish coaches to help them develop their game. Another great example is Xin Wen, who is the Olympic champion, gold medalist. And Xin Wen has had a Spanish coach for many years. She spends a lot of time in Barcelona training. That's another example of an Asian player who is not a native-born Spanish player, but she's clearly Spanish trained, and she's benefiting from the Spanish model of training. And there's just so many examples down the line. I have to go through the top 100 and sort of count how many players have a Spanish coach or who lived and trained in Spain or spend a lot of time training in Spain. It's a significant amount, significantly more than what you see with the top number of 7 players in the top 100. There's many more who are either living in Spain, training in Spain, doing training blocks in Spain, or have a Spanish coach. I think it's a significant number. That would be a very interesting count to do. And it's both men and women that are training in Spain. So I think this is the phenomenon that I talked about in my essay that I think is really interesting, that Spain is no longer really like the best place, the best country. We, as in the US, we are the leading country now. But Spain is definitely one of the leaders in training, and it's one of the destinations for elite training that players around the world know to go with a Spanish coach, or to train with a Spanish coach, to learn according to the Spanish system. So what makes that system so unique? Like, why is it special? And that's what I wrote about in my book, The Secrets of Spanish Tennis. It's in its second edition. The first edition came out in 2014, and we just released a new edition. And basically what they do in Spain is they have an emphasis on movement. They spend a lot of time on footwork and movement, so the players develop a beautiful, graceful flow on the court, and they develop really great balance and coordination when they move. They become very fluid movers, like dancers on the court. And I think that's one of the real benefits of the Spanish method. You learn to move better than other players. You learn to position yourself in relationship to the ball. They spend a lot of time working on the eyes and the feet, getting in great position to receive the ball. And so there's a heavy emphasis on movement and positioning in Spain that now is becoming more common in other countries, but it wasn't always the case. In the 1980s, 1990s, Spain was really a leader in that respect. All right, I think we have our first question on the board here. There's way too much Spanish influence. Sorry, it's a long comment. Where do you live? Tell me where you live. He says there's a really big Spanish influence where he lives. Let me know what part of the world you're from, and then how you see a big Spanish influence there. Let me know. Thank you. So the movement is like a huge part of the Spanish method that I think is very, very special. Another really special thing that they do in Spain is they have this wonderful system of racket acceleration. I've talked about this a lot, and I've written about this a lot. It's basically like a velocity-based training, a VBT form of training. So they have acceleration drills that I think are very, very unique and really do increase your racket speed. So they increase your power and they increase your spin. So Spanish players are very famous for having a big topspin forehand, for example. Rafa Nadal and Carlos Alcaraz have those shots. Many Spanish players are forehand dominant that way. And in fact, many coaches in Spain believe the forehand is the most important shot in tennis, not the serve. Typically in the US, we think the serve is the most important shot. In Spain, they have a philosophy that the forehand is the most important shot. So I think that's a really cool, really interesting insight. And they have these wonderful drills that they do, these fast-paced hand-tossing drills that can literally increase your racket speed. They can help you hit the ball faster and to get more spin, which is really, really valuable at the professional level, at any level. So these are drills that I use all the time with my players, and they're just wonderful for developing like whip and RPM and good kinetic chain, really great stuff. And so that's another thing that makes the Spanish method really, really special. Another thing that they do in Spain that's really unique is they work on consistency. So Spanish players, Alcaraz is a little different. He goes for he's a little more aggressive, but in general, Spanish players are very well known for being solid and patient and consistent. So that's another important element of the Spanish method. They teach players to be stable, to be patient, to be selective with their shots, and they encourage players to extend rallies. So anytime you see a Spanish player, even Alcaraz, even though Alcaraz is explosive and he can do incredible drop shots and hit big winners and things like that, at his heart, he can grind and he can be very, very consistent. So Alcaraz is a kind of an exception to the typical Spanish player, but Alcaraz is, if he wants to be, he can be very, very solid and consistent. And Spanish players are known for that. Like when you play a Spanish guy, like I played on the lower level futures circuit, and I played D1 tennis, and Spanish guys, you know you're going to usually get a good baseline battle because they're very patient and they're very consistent. They don't make a lot of mistakes. So they're very stingy with their errors. So I think that's a very good quality to teach all players, not just Spanish players. But that's something they do very well in Spain. They teach a high shot tolerance, which I think is a really good philosophy and practice to have. In Spain, they have a wonderful philosophy of suffering. Like, they literally believe that players should suffer on the court. They believe this culturally and in the tennis world there, that players should suffer. They should learn how to suffer. Rafa Nadal talks about this a lot. I'm sure Alcaraz has talked about this. But they have this warrior ethos. You know, they have this warrior spirit. And it's very special, and something I try to incorporate into my teaching here in the U.S. is I try to have my players learn the same, to develop the same fighting spirit, the same disciplina, and the willingness to suffer is something that's very commonly talked about and coached to all of the athletes there. And so it's just a beautiful philosophy where you're not afraid of pain, suffering. You develop this endurance. Endurance is a word they use a lot in Spain. You develop this capacity to endure, to have a high level of endurance, and to withstand a lot of pain and suffering. That's a quality they actually try to actively develop in the tennis players in Spain. And that's why Spanish players oftentimes are known as the most difficult guys to beat in the tournament. Especially if the match goes to like 3 sets or 5 sets, Spanish players kind of have that reputation of being very tough to defeat because they always fight and they never give up. And it's interesting to me that I think a lot of the Italian players have adopted this fighting spirit, this approach, this willingness to suffer, and that's really helped Italian tennis in many ways. Okay, the comment was from India, and everyone uses topspin. He says that there's a big Spanish influence in India. And this is what I was referring to, and that the players play with a lot of topspin, which we also talked about, and they're very stable. They can grind like 20 balls, and that's very typical of Spanish players. They're like the best guys to practice with at the tournament because you always know you're going to get nice rallies and be able to get a good rhythm with the Spanish guy, you know. So that's one of the assets, I think, and I think that's a good thing. I think to have a well-organized game, a stable game, that's a word they use a lot in Spain, stability and organization. A very balanced and controlled game can only help you. You can build your weapons on top of that foundation, but you're always going to have a solid foundation when you train the Spanish way. You're not going to have any holes in your game, at least from the baseline in terms of movement. Spanish players are also very well known for being the fittest guys and girls. And that's another major part of the Spanish system. They work a lot on the physical conditioning. Many countries do that now, but they all took that from Spain. Spain was doing that in the 80s and 90s, really excelling at becoming the most physically fit athletes at the tournament. And that's a major part of the Spanish system. So if you like fitness, if you like working hard in the gym and on the track, the Spanish method is for you. They do a lot of physical work off the court. So people think they train like 6 hours of tennis a day in Spain. That's typically not the case at all. They train about half that, about 3 hours a day, and they spend 2.5 hours in the gym, on the track, doing injury prevention, doing workouts to become the most physical beast at the tournament. And that is another really major secret of Spanish tennis. They actively develop the athlete, and I think that they were one of the first countries to do that, and that's one of the reasons why they dominated world tennis. That's a very small country, 50 to 60 million people, and for a very small country, they do extremely well on the international stage. How is that possible? Because they have this wonderful, very unique system, which now, sometimes when I talk about it now, 20, 30 years after Spain dominated, I guess 20 years or so, 20 to 30 years after Spain dominated the world, putting 15 players in the top 100, it doesn't sound that special now because everyone's copied Spain and everyone's training with many Spanish influences. Like I said, Spanish coaches are going all over the world and sharing their method with everybody. So the competition is getting better. The competition is getting more fierce, you know. So Spain is, you know, has been a leader for going back 20, 30 years, and they dominated the world for so long in the 90s and early 2000s, and people don't realize how hard that is for a little country to do that, and how now that everyone kind of trains the Spanish way, they just say like, oh yeah, that sounds like, you know, everybody knows that. That's just like tennis training. But this method was very, very unique and original back in the, you know, late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s, you know, when Luis Bruguera and William Pato Alvarez were training players in the 70s and 80s in Spain. This was very, very unique approach to training players. The other cool thing that's really interesting about Spanish tennis is I believe most of Spanish tennis is based on ecological dynamics. And ecological dynamics is a way of teaching that is very much about developing the environment around the player, not teaching a lot of distinct or directly teaching certain techniques to players, but sort of guided discovery method, a way of developing the environment to shape the development of players. And Spain is a very good example of ecological development of players. And that was also a very, very forward-thinking approach, primarily developed by Luis Bruguera, who is one of the godfathers of Spanish tennis. He was teaching in an ecological way, using a guided discovery method in the 70s and 80s, which was very avant-garde, which was very much on the frontier of teaching back then. Because back then, traditionally, you would just teach, you know, rote technique, and everything would be kind of like coach-directed. There were a lot of command coaches. Pato Alvarez was a command-style coach in Spain in the 70s and 80s and so on. But Luis Bruguera, to me, he has been one of my biggest mentors in Spain. I've studied for decades with him. And his approach was just brilliant for that time, you know, very, very forward thinking, very much on the cutting edge of psychology and sport psychology and skill acquisition and motor learning, where he was all about developing, and still is all about developing, the environment of the player, the drills that shape a player, rather than teaching the player directly, do this, do this, do this, do this. He always said, talk less and find the right exercise. So he was practicing a form of ecological dynamics he was using ecological dynamics in his teaching in the 70s and 80s, which I think is just brilliant and remarkable. And I think that Spain's rise, you can very much make the case that Spain's rise to the top of the tennis world in the 80s and 90s was powered by ecological dynamics, by an ecological dynamics approach to teaching, which is very unique. In fact, I may write some future articles and publish in peer-reviewed articles on this very subject, because I think it's a fascinating turn of history. It's a fascinating story, and it really demonstrates the power of using the environment and using a constraints-based approach to develop players, rather than the traditional style of teaching players, which is very coach-dependent and very, very much about explicit direction for players. In ecological dynamics, you set up constraints and you let the player's skills emerge from the environment that you set up, rather than explicitly telling them to do this, do this, do this. And that approach is still very resonant in Spain today. Even today, and any coach who's studied the Bruguera method or has been in the orbit of Luis Bruguera, who's one of the most famous coaches in Spain, of all time in Spain, is teaching in an ecological way, because they're trying to say less, they're trying to find the right exercise, they're trying to shape the player by making adjustments to the environment rather than just explicit direct teaching. And when you go to Spain, you can feel that. You can feel that, geez, the coaches don't tell me always what to do. They let me learn. They let my skills emerge. They let my tactics emerge. And they do a lot more play and play-based development. They do a lot of drills, but they don't give a lot, they don't stuff the drills with so much instruction. And they do a lot of situational and what I would call representative type of drilling and training, which is more realistic. And so Spanish players oftentimes are known for their smarts and their intelligence. Luis Bruguera used to call it the intuitive intelligence, or he still does call it the intuitive intelligence. Spanish players, they develop this great court sense and this tennis IQ. And I think one of the reasons they're known for that is because they do less rote drilling with explicit instructions, and they do a lot of volume of repetition, but it's very much in a guided discovery way, which allows players to their best abilities, their best strategies, their best skills emerge in Spain, rather than all of the players being sort of shaped like built like robots or being designed like in a lab. The players, the great players emerge from Spain. You could make a case that is why they've had two of the greatest champions in the history of tennis recently. They have Rafa Nadal and Carlos Alcaraz. You could make a case that it's partly due to this type of approach where they don't have a top-down, like we're going to force all the players to do this or hit this type of forehand or do this type of swing or whatever. Where some countries and coaches are like that. They're very, very direct and explicit. In Spain, they have this like beautiful philosophy that we're going to set up the constraints, we're going to set up the parameters, we're going to work really hard, but we're going to let the players sort of emerge from this environment that we set up. And I think you see the results of that is great players can show up from that type of environment that encourages skills to emerge rather than just telling players what to do. I think that's very, very interesting. Rafa Nadal comes out of there, and then what are the chances that another incredible champion in the world of tennis, two of the greatest players of all time, emerge so close together from this tiny, basically modest-sized country. It's not tiny, but it's just an average-sized European country. How is it possible that two of the greatest players of all time come from that little place so close together? I think it's because there's something going on there with the method, the teaching method. It's beautifully ecological. It's beautifully constraints-based in most cases. And they work really, really hard, and they get a lot of repetitions, and they get players really strong and fit, and they develop this fighting spirit. And I think you see like a recipe for developing champions, And in this case, how did they get lucky to have the two of the greatest champions in tennis history so close together? This is going to be a very interesting story to explore and talk about even more, because if Alcaraz keeps winning, he's already won 7 Grand Slams, and he's quite young. He could easily win many more. And then, you have to say, how is it that these two guys come from such a small place? And what is special about this place? Is it just luck? Is it just random chance? I think there's something more there. There's something to the methodology there. And it could be this ecological approach that they have that was basically fostered and developed by Luis Bruguera. The other great Spanish legend, Pato Alvarez, did not have an ecological approach. He was very, very command-oriented. He told his players exactly what to do this, do this, do this. And it very much contrasted with Luis Bruguera's ecological approach, his constraints-based approach, his guided discovery approach. So you have these two coaches in Spain with slightly different approaches, both great. And I think Spain sort of adopted parts of both of those coaches' philosophies, but the ecological approach, the guided discovery approach is very prominent in Spain. You go there and sometimes, you're just like, can you just like tell me what, some of my students have been there, like, can they just tell me what to do? Can they give me more instruction? So it's very much less instruction, more work, and let the skills, let the skills and the strategies and the player, let those things emerge from the training, which I think is really, really fascinating. And I've had players who maybe need a little more instruction when they've been there. They've been frustrated by that, but that is like a very prominent style of coaching in Spain. And I use that method here all the time with a lot of excellent results with my players. I think some players need more explicit instruction. They want more analysis, but by and large, I've learned from the Spanish method to keep quiet, not say so much, not overanalyze, and sometimes to step back and just find the right exercise for my players and let their skills emerge rather than me always telling them do this, do this, do this. Sometimes the skill that emerges is better than something that I thought up. But I think that's a really fascinating aspect and a very interesting history of Spanish tennis. So guys, we have one last comment here. Basically, the comment is that Rafa changed the game and that the top spin is so critical and the Spanish guys are the fittest. And I think that's true. I think Rafa proved how dominant, how important and dominant topspin can be, and how you can use topspin as a weapon. And all of the Spanish players try to play like that now. There's a few exceptions, like Agut comes to mind, and there's some other Spanish players that don't play heavy topspin. Traditionally, Spanish players did not play heavy topspin. That's more of a modern. Spanish players used to actually slice their backhands all the time, going back to players like Jose Higueras and other famous Spanish players from the 60s, 70s, 80s. In recent times, Spain is known for heavy topspin, and that's one of the wonderful things they do in Spain. That is, as I mentioned, they have those incredible drills that develop heavy topspin. So, guys, I'm happy to share with you some insights about the Spanish game. I want to reiterate my congrats for Carlos Alcaraz. It's pretty incredible. If you have any questions about the Spanish style of training, or you want to talk, if you have any questions about Alcaraz's game and how he developed his game, and if he's typical of a traditional Spanish player or not, what he does different than some other Spanish champions, just let me know. Drop a comment, and I answer all the comments personally. So if you have a comment, just put it down, and I will check it later. It's been fun chatting with you guys, and as we do more Sunday chats, hopefully the community can join and share ideas and ask any questions that they have. So guys, Spanish tennis is still here. The numbers are a little bit down. American tennis is way, way up. But remember, Spanish tennis is very strong in the methodology. They have a very unique philosophy, very unique training system, and they're training the world now. That's my key takeaway for all of you. In Spain, they don't dominate the world now on the Pro Tour. They're good, but they're not the best. But they are dominating the world in terms of training elite players, both juniors and pros. So the Spanish success continues, but in a slightly different form. They're no longer, well, Alcaraz is winning the slams, so that's continued success. But just in terms of like the numbers of dominating the tour, it's not like it used to be. But it's still pretty impressive what they're doing in terms of what, Alcaraz's results and having a good solid core of players. There's also some new young players coming up like Rafa Jodar and Landeluce. There's some really good young Spanish players, especially the next Rafa. Rafa Jodar is the one that everyone has their eye on right now. He played 1 year for the University of Virginia, and he just turned pro recently, and he qualified for the Australian Open. Jodar is one of the young guns to watch. Check out the young Rafa, the next Rafa, who's really talented, and people think that he can be a really good pro. And And Landaluce is also very good. I believe they both won the Junior U.S. Open. So there is some depth coming up. There are some young guns coming up, but it's not like the Spanish Armada days where Spain had, 12, 13, 14, 15 players in the top 100 for a modestly sized country. It's not like that anymore. But Spain is the destination for elite training in the world, along with, let's say parts of Florida. South Florida is another hot spot. Barcelona is one of those like very, very special tennis hubs in the world for training. It's just an incredible place for training. So many elite coaches, so many top academies in Spain, not just in Barcelona, but that whole sort of eastern seaboard there on the coast there. It's got so many elite opportunities to train. It reminds me a lot of Florida. There's not many places like that in the world. So I just think if you understand what's going on here, you can see that Spanish training is still a very, very powerful and effective system. The training method is very effective, but we may not ever see 14, 15 players in the top 100 like we did back in the heyday. That may not happen again, especially now with the U.S. dominant. But we have one question before we go. Why does U.S. tennis on the men's side lagging behind Spain so much? They're not. We're leading the world in terms of the number of players. 15 men in the top 100. The U.S. has the most of all of them, but we haven't had a Grand Slam winner. So maybe that has to do with the willingness to suffer, the way the Spanish players work. They have this capacity to suffer that maybe we need to develop a little more in our players. That remains to be seen. I'm telling you, if you go to Spain, I'm not exaggerating, the entire country is on board with teaching the kids to suffer. Drilling until it hurts, handling pain, fighting spirit. Like they teach the kids this philosophy from a very young age. So maybe that has something to do with why they have Grand Slam champions and not just like a lot of really good players who are top 100. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they're able to develop champions, because of the work ethic there and the willingness to suffer. But I mean, we have hard workers here in the U.S., but maybe that's just the level that Spain is working at is ultra special. I don't know for sure, but it's a really good question. Why hasn't the U.S. had a Grand Slam winner? Even though we have so many good players now, why aren't we getting a Grand Slam winner? I have a feeling in the next few years we will get one on the men's side. It's going to be someone who's a really hard worker and is willing to suffer. So we just need an American player to step up and do that. We have a lot of talented players. All right, guys, I enjoyed having the community talk with you, and I'll see you on the next Sunday on the next program. Bye, guys.